Sam had been a train driver for 12 years. He wasn't the type to get spooked easily. He'd seen it all: bloody accidents, crazed passengers, even a few bodies on the tracks. But nothing ever really shook him. Not until that night. It started like any other shift. He was assigned to drive a train through the District 66, a rundown, nearly forgotten area where the tracks creaked like old bones and the stations were more rust than metal. The train itself was a relic, older than sin and just as cursed if you believed the stories. Most drivers avoided it like the plague, claiming it had a history. Sam, he didn't buy into that superstitious bullshit. Trains were machines. They didn't have ghosts. He clocked in, grabbed his worn leather gloves and made his way to the station. The night was colder than usual, a biting wind that carried whispers if you listened too hard. Sam didn't. He just wanted to get the job done, get home, and pour himself a stiff drink. The train stood there, looming in the darkness. Its once red paint had faded to a dull, lifeless maroon. The windows were smudged with something that looked like soot but wasn't. The air around it was thick, almost oppressive. But Sam didn't let it get to him. He was a professional, after all. As he boarded, the cold intensified. He could see his breath now, even though it was the middle of August. He flipped on the lights inside the train, but they flickered like they were resisting him, like they didn't want to show what was lurking in the corners. The control room was just as he expected, outdated but functional. He sat down in the creaky old chair, set his coffee beside him, and began his pre-departure checks. Everything seemed normal. The gauges were where they should be, the brakes responsive, the engine purring along, but there was something off, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Maybe it was the way the train hummed, like it had a pulse of its own. Maybe it was the odd sensation of being watched, even though he was alone, or maybe it was the silence. The kind of silence that wasn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, something waiting. The first few stops were uneventful. The usual late-night passengers, a couple of drunkards, a tired nurse, an old man with a face like he'd seen too much. They didn't say much, just slumped in their seats, waiting to get wherever they were going. Sam barely noticed them. He was too focused on that feeling, the one that was gnawing at him, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. And then came the sixth stop, District 66. Sam hadn't been there before, no reason to. It was one of those places people forgot about, a ghost town in the middle of nowhere. But there was a station there, and he had to stop. The platform was empty, or so it seemed at first. But as he pulled the train to a halt, he saw a figure in the distance, standing just beyond the edge of the light. A man, maybe, or a shadow shaped like a man. It was hard to tell. The figure didn't move, didn't step closer, didn't signal to board, just stood there watching. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. He opened the doors, even though he didn't expect anyone to get on. And no one did. Not that he could see, anyway. But the train felt heavier, as if someone or something had entered. He glanced at the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. Just the empty carriage, the old seats with their frayed fabric, and that persistent, unnerving hum. He shut the doors, more to break the tension than anything else, and set the train in motion. But as they pulled away from the station, he heard it, a low, guttural whisper. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew it wasn't his imagination. He whipped around, expecting to see someone right behind him. No one. But the whispering didn't stop. It got louder, more insistent, like 100 voices speaking at once, all of them angry, all of them desperate. The air grew thick with the scent of something foul, like rotting meat left out too long in the sun. Sam's heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in his life, he felt real, bone-deep fear. He tried to shake it off, tell himself it was just the wind, the creaks of the old train, his mind playing tricks on him. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. He knew there was something else on that train, something he couldn't see but could feel, creeping closer with every passing second. The lights flickered again, this time more violently. The hum of the train turned into a growl and the controls in front of him started to glitch, the needles on the gauges spinning wildly as if the train itself was panicking. Sam gripped the controls, trying to steady his hands, trying to keep the train on the tracks. But it felt like the train had a mind of its own, like it was fighting him, resisting him. And then he saw them. Reflections in the glass of the control room door, dozens of shadowy figures standing in the carriage behind him, their faces obscured, their forms flickering like a bad signal on an old TV. They didn't move, just stared at him with hollow eyes, eyes that were both there and not there, eyes that saw through him, into him, like they knew every sin, every secret he'd ever buried. Sam's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, but he was frozen, trapped in that chair as the train hurtled forward. The whispering grew louder, filling his head, making it hard to think, to breathe. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping they'd be gone when he opened them, but when he did, they were closer, their distorted faces pressing against the glass, mouths moving in silent curses. And then the train began to slow down, not because Sam wanted it to, but because it had to. The engine sputtered, the brakes engaged on their own, and the train rolled to a stop. Sam looked up, heart hammering in his chest, and saw where they were. Another station, one that wasn't on any map he'd ever seen, a place that shouldn't exist. The platform was old, crumbling, overgrown with weeds and moss, and standing on it were more of them, shadows in human form, waiting. The doors opened, but Sam didn't touch the controls. They just opened, inviting whatever was out there to come in. The shadows boarded one by one, filling the train until there was no space left, until Sam could barely breathe under the weight of their presence. They didn't sit, didn't speak, just stared at him with those empty eyes. And then, without warning, the train started moving again. Faster this time, too fast, like it was trying to outrun something. But Sam knew deep down that there was no escape. He was trapped with them, with these things that weren't alive but weren't dead either. Things that had been waiting for him all along. He tried to stop the train, but the controls wouldn't respond. He tried to call for help, but the radio was dead, just static and more of that infernal whispering. He was alone, completely and utterly alone, with nothing but the shadows and the cold, suffocating darkness. The train raced through the night, faster and faster, the world outside a blur of black and grey. Sam could feel them closing in, could feel their cold breath on the back of his neck, their fingers brushing against his skin. He could hear their voices clearer now, and he finally understood what they were saying. They were calling his name. Sam looked up, and there in the rearview mirror he saw his own reflection. But it wasn't him. It was a twisted, distorted version of himself, eyes hollow and dead, skin pale and stretched tight over bone. The reflection smiled, a grotesque, mocking grin, and Sam realized with dawning horror that it wasn't a reflection at all. It was a glimpse of what he was becoming. The train plunged into a tunnel, the darkness swallowing everything. The whispering stopped, replaced by a silence so deep it pressed against his ears, his chest, his mind. And in that silence, Sam knew the truth. He was never leaving this train. He was a part of it now, just like the others. A ghost in a machine that wasn't supposed to exist, bound to the rails, forever moving, forever trapped. The train emerged from the tunnel into the dawn, but Sam didn't see it. He was gone, replaced by something else, something that looked like him but wasn't. The train slowed as it approached a station, another forgotten stop in another forgotten place. The doors opened, and a new passenger boarded, unaware of the fate that awaited them. And as the train pulled away, leaving the station behind, a whisper echoed through the empty carriage, a whisper that carried on the wind, through the tracks, into the night. Welcome to the District 66, and the train kept going forever and ever, carrying the lost, the damned, and those who thought they could escape. But no one ever does. Not from the District 66, not from the shadows, not from what waits in the dark.